Been a long time coming, you guys. Welcome back to the channel. It's finally time for another video, but allow me to explain where I've been for the last 2.5 months. Yep, that's right. Got an Xbox Series X, been playing a lot of Xbox. Can't say enough good things about this console. It's been really great to use. I love the increased frame rate, the 120 Hz mode on a lot of these games, as you can see. Been playing a lot of Call of Duty Cold War. Been playing Warzone a lot here lately too. And just enjoying the holidays. Hope you guys had good holidays too. And yeah, I mean, this Xbox is great. Highly recommend it. Some of you guys might be PlayStation players, and that's cool too. I really don't care. PC players, Xbox players, it's all good. But let me get back to the topic of the day. The Z1000, guys. It's time to say goodbye. Allow me to introduce the Benelli TNT 600. That's right, you guys heard it right. This is a 2017 Benelli TNT 600, also known overseas as the BN600i. It is sporting a water-cooled 600cc inline-4 electronically fuel-injected motor that is actually based on the 2005 Yamaha R6. We'll go over that a little bit more later in the video. It puts out 82 peak horsepower at 11,500 RPMs and 39 foot-pounds of torque at 10,500 RPMs. It has a 6-speed transmission with a top speed of approximately 130 miles per hour. Up front, we have a 120 by 70 aspect ratio tire on a 17-inch rim, and in the rear, we have a 180/55 tire, also on a 17-inch rim. And from the factory, these are Pirelli Angel ST tires. It has a wet weight of 474 pounds, can carry 4.2 gallons of gasoline, and has a fuel economy of about 45 city and 60 highway. Now, a lot of people give this bike a lot of flack because it is produced in China. It is no longer owned by Benelli, who is an Italian company. Now, with that being said, the company that owns them, we're going to call them QJ for short, they also own Lotus and Volvo. Also, with that being said, yes, these bikes are built in China as of now, but the QC department is run by the Italian engineers who design these bikes. On top of that, I just want to go ahead and say that, some of the KTMs, like the Duke 390 I used to own, and even some Harley Davidsons like the Street 750, those are built in India. And if you guys are okay purchasing bikes that are built in India, honestly, I don't think that there's going to be much quality control issue between India standards and China standards. And that's just me. So far, this bike looks absolutely amazing to me, and there's QC all over the bike. You can just see the little pen marks that they've put everywhere that they've checked over things. Alright, let's get back to the specs. Up front, we also have twin 320mm discs with 4 piston calipers. In the rear, we have a 240mm disc with a twin piston caliper. We have 50mm upside down forks, and I'm not quite sure, don't quote me, but I believe the brakes are by Brembo. They're not actually branded Brembos, but I believe they are designed by Brembo. Same thing, that's kind of similar to the KTM Duke 390 where the bike had by Bray brakes on it. Except on this bike, they do say Benelli on them. But from some research that I found, I believe these are designed and made by Brembo. The frame is actually shared from Aprilia from the Shiver 750-900. And like I said before, the motor is from the Yamaha R6, which Yamaha used this motor in the FZ6 and the FZ6R. And we'll touch on that very lightly right now. The FZ6R had the closest horsepower ratings to what I could find that this bike shares. The FZ6R put out about 78 horsepower. This bike puts out about 82. So I think the tuning is likely to be around the same as what the FZ6R was sporting. Now the FZ6 had slightly more horsepower and a little bit more top-end RPMs. And obviously the Yamaha R6, which had this motor in its full strength, was making quite a lot more power at about 120 horsepower. So the motor is understressed, should be very reliable, and uses basically the same parts. Not sure internally if they're exactly the same, but at least as far as maintenance goes, oil filter, that kind of thing, you can use the same Yamaha oil filter. You can use the aftermarket oil filters that fit this motor as well, like the KN204 race filter. so on and so forth. Briefly, I just want to talk about the competition for this bike. So competition in 2017 for this bike would have been the Ninja, or rather the Z650, the Yamaha MT-07, and also the Suzuki SV650. Now, there's some key points I want to go over in the specifications for each one of those bikes compared to the Benelli, and honestly, I think there's a lot of value hidden in the Benelli that you don't get on some of these other bikes. And granted, these other bikes are made by Japanese manufacturers. They're well-known manufacturers, and you know you're getting a quality product whenever you buy them. But I do believe that Benelli just snuck in a little bit of like extra features that a lot of people took for granted, and they just didn't have the marketing and, you know, the well-known name to really carry the brand in the US market as strong as they could have. So let's go over the Z650 first. So the Z650 has a 649cc parallel twin electronically fuel injected liquid cooled motor that makes 67 horsepower at 8,500 RPM and 48 torque at 7,000. It had a 41 millimeter regular fork, not upside down, non-adjustable, compared to the Benelli's 50 millimeter upside down fork, which, by the way, the Benelli is also non-adjustable. The Z650 has dual 300 millimeter front discs with 2 piston calipers and a 220 millimeter single rear piston caliper. It has a 120/70 front tire and a 160/50 rear tire, so slightly smaller rear tire, which does actually help with cornering ability a little bit in agility. It sports a 4-gallon tank and gets about 55 miles per gallon average, but it does weigh 412 pounds, which is a good 65 or so pounds less than the Benelli. Moving on to the MT-07, that has a 689cc parallel twin with the 270-degree crank, that cross-plane crank, which everybody knows sounds absolutely amazing. I actually love that motor. I've never actually ridden one, but I love the way they sound, and I love the concept. I wish more manufacturers would do cross-plane cranks in their parallel twins. I'm talking to you, Kawasaki. So this motor makes 74 horsepower at 9,000 RPM and 50 torque at 6,900 RPM, so quite a bit more torque. All of these bikes in this list are going to make their power a little bit sooner than the Benelli because these are parallel twins, whereas the Benelli is an inline 4, and then everybody knows that the inline 4 motors, they make their power up top. You got to really keep them singing to get them going. All right, the MT-07 41 millimeter fork up front. And I have to say that everybody knows the MT-07's front forks are bouncy as hell from the factory. They're also non-adjustable, and they really need some rework before they're actually really good handling forks. We have dual 282 millimeter discs up front, and we have a single 245 millimeter disc in the rear. We have a 120 front tire, and we have a 180/55 rear tire, so same tires as the Benelli. We have a smaller fuel tank at 3.7 gallons, and we have fuel efficiency ranging from 52 to 57 miles per gallon, but this bike is the lightest in the class at 403 pounds. Okay, moving on to the SV650. This sports a 645cc V-twin motor. This motor's been around in their lineup for a long time. I think since like 1997 was the original SV650. It makes 76 horsepower at 8,500 RPM and 47 torque at 8,100 RPM. It has a 41 millimeter non-adjustable regular fork, and it has dual 290 millimeter discs up front. It has a 240 single disc in the rear, a 120 front tire, and a 160/60 rear tire. It has a 3.8 gallon fuel tank with a fuel efficiency of about 52 to 60 miles per gallon and weighs 430 pounds. So the main key points that I want to drag across here is the Benelli on paper makes the most top end horsepower, and I think if you get these bikes screaming into a very, you know, like a rolling race, a top end race, I think the Benelli would come very close to being that top bike, and I think the only one it might struggle against is that MT-07, mainly because of how much torque that MT-07 puts out. All of these bikes have very similar top speeds. They're going to be around the 120 to 130, maybe 135 mile per hour range. I think the Benelli would take the top speed for sure, just because of how much peak horsepower it makes up there in the upper RPMs. But the things that I want to drive across, like I said, is you get larger brakes, you get more powerful brakes per se in terms of how many pistons each caliper has. You get the largest fuel tank. You get pretty good range. I mean, they're all really good, but you get pretty good range. So the range of this bike should be about the best. The only downfall really is the weight. All of these bikes weigh anywhere between like 60 to 70 pounds lighter than the Benelli. So the Benelli is pretty heavy, but I have to say, for being the weight that it is, especially compared to the Z1000, it feels a lot lighter than what they're saying. I'm not saying it's a lightweight by any means, like it's not featherweight, but putting it up on the rear stand and so on, it felt way lighter than what they were saying. I'm not sure. You get a much bigger, fork in the front. They're upside down, so they're a little bit more sportier. Like I said, you get those larger brakes. You got a really good motor from Yamaha. If the FZ6 was still around, that would have been, the bike that really competed with these bikes in that market. But Benelli is really the only inline 4 600 to 650 cc class motorcycle that was left in this segment at the time. And later on down the road, a couple years after this, I think 2018 or 19 is when the CB650R came out, and that bike does very well for the market. And here's the other place that Benelli really wins. I think brand new, you could get this Benelli on a showroom floor from a dealership, which there just happens to be a dealership just down the street from me where I live that sells Benelli and SSR products. You could get this bike brand new for about $6,000, $6,500, whereas these other bikes were in the mid sevens, and I think the most expensive one on the list was closer to $8,000. And the CB650R, that thing costs just under 10 grand now. It makes a little more horsepower than the Benelli. The CB650R makes a little more torque, but obviously it has a 650cc motor, so that's a given. It baffles my mind that this bike did so poorly based off of the fact that it's just produced in China, even though if you do the research, I mean, they're QC'd by the Italian engineers who design these motorcycles, and honestly, I think there's a lot more value in this bike than people are giving it credit for. I've got a couple things that I'm going to do to this bike just to get started. We're going to do some bar end mirrors, same bar end mirrors that I actually used on my Duke 390. I'm going to put this tank pad on here with the little Italian flag at the top of it. And I'm also going to put a battery tender on because, as a lot of you know, if you've looked at the community post, I'm still healing from knee surgery from my accident last summer. Just got the knee surgery on January 15th. Hoping to be back up and riding within the next 2 weeks, maybe 3. We'll see. I have to, take things slow and just make sure that I'm ready to jump back on the bike and handle it as it comes. So thank you guys for tuning in. If you enjoyed the content, please hit that subscribe button. Leave a like on the video as always, and I will see you in the next one.